Good afternoon, brethren and sisters. This is Gillie Priest of Gillie Priest Revolutionary Radio. Today I'm going to build the reasoning around the Jamaican Constitution and the present efforts being made by the Jamaican government. I don't know the correct adjective to apply to it, but whether to modify, change, or organically develop a new constitution. I don't know what's the government approach. I'm not really paying close attention to the issue like I know that I should. And the reason why I haven't been paying a close attention to this, but I'm trying to find one of those community-based constitutional committees that have been set up throughout the country so I could get more actively involved. So until I find one, I will be on the fringes. But in building the reasoning upon the Jamaican Constitution today, I want to place it within a certain context and parallel to another constitution to just draw some comparison. I want to first begin by drawing a comparison between the Jamaican present constitution and the Constitution of the United States of America. Presently, the United States of America comprises of roughly 360 million people. Yet, the Constitution that governs the life of 360 million people is roughly 26 pages. On the other hand, Jamaica has roughly 3 million people on the island as a governing constitution that's roughly 168 pages. Now think about that for a minute. How could such a small island as a constitution that constitutes 168 pages while the ruling empire of the world today, even though the sun is setting on it, is governed by a constitution of roughly 26 pages. That comparison right here, it tells you a lot about the positions of the people and the mentality that constructed these two constitutions at the time when they were constructed, by whom and for what purpose. Now let's look at the American Constitution for a minute. The American Constitution exemplifies a nation. Now we're going to speak academically now and theoretically, not practically. The American Constitution was an effort by the founding fathers of America to create a nation based upon certain ideas. It was not to create a nation to serve a physical need, but to carry the ideas that were developed in Europe, what they call during the Renaissance, during the Enlightenment, during the time of reasoning. They wanted to constitute a nation out of ideas. So when you read the preamble, the beginning of the United States Constitution, it talks about life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. These are intangible terms. These are not terms where you use those terms and a physical constitution of their meaning comes out at you. No. It is the people themselves that gives practicality to these terms. Equality, justice, pursuit of liberty, freedom. These terms have no tangible meaning. These are just relative terms. But because the American Constitution was formed out of pure ideas, then they were able to use certain generic terms, knowing that the practicality of those terms will eventually fill out the Constitution as time goes on. All men are created equal. These terms were written when millions of people were in slavery in the United States. So what does that term actually mean? All men were created equal. Today we use such terms in loose ways, as if the meaning and the practicality of these terms come down out of the sky to people. No, men are who give practicality to these terms. So the American Constitution is a constitution of ideas. The ideas where Europeans stated they were free to pursue whatever they deem necessary, or by their will or by their likings, and no one should stand in their way. This goes against different races, as well as going against the lower classes. So when the Constitution was written in the United States, they did not have to spell things out in detail. Because one thing you have to understand about the American Constitution, it is a constitution to protect the property class. The property class, the owners of property, and those who control the means of production, their occupation is the only legitimate occupation within the United States of America. Therefore, all laws, rules, regulation, edicts, all these things has to conform to the will of the property owners. And whichever ideas one may comes up with that goes against the interests of the property class will therefore be declared unconstitutional. So the interests of the property class was what was taken into consideration when the United States Constitution was being written. So, for example, the right to own property. The Constitution did not have to spell out at that time what does the word property means. What does it mean to say your right to own property? What was this right? Was it a fundamental right or a basic? No. Those terms were left for later generations, depending on how the interests of the property class were being developed, what challenges they were facing. Then they were able to make adjustments so the laws were in conformity with the desire of the property class. So when you read the American Constitution and the Bill of Rights, these are just basic terms that the American government over the centuries were able to use statutory laws to give meaning to, depending on the challenges that the ruling class may face. But prior to even those statutory laws and the constitutional law, there was a law that governed, that came with the British from England to the United States, and that law is referred to as the common law. The common law basically constituted of laws that were organically developed by the British people, that was never written down, but people just know within a community or a region or on the national level, this was how the British interact with each other. But it wasn't written down. And a lot of people would be surprised to know that even though the British gave us a constitution, England does not have a constitution. A lot of people doesn't know that. England has laws, but not a constitution. But they found it necessary to impose a constitution upon Jamaica and the prior British Dominion. That's another aspect we're going to visit. So the common law, let me give an example of a common law. There are common laws in England that were written down that basically, if a mango, for example, or any fruit was on a person's property, you could not enter that property and pick that fruit. But if the fruit fell to the ground on its own, like the wind blew, the fruit fell to the ground, any passersby had the right to go and pick that fruit up. They had the dry wood rule, unwritten again. If there's a dry branch or any branch on a tree on a private property, you could not go on that property and cut that limb. But if that limb withers and fall to the ground, and you got to remember, in those days people were using wood for fuel to cook their food. you could walk on that property and pick that dry wood up and go home and cook. Common laws, the common way of how people dealt with each other before there were written laws in England. Those common laws was also transplanted to the colonies right here in Jamaica and throughout the British domain. And to show you what I mean by that as an example in Jamaica, several months ago, I was following in the Jamaican paper where there was a debate about how certain private properties owners were buying up lands to the beaches and denying people access to the beach, even when the beach is still seen and taken as a public beach. And those who were advocating on behalf of the local community to access these beaches, they were using a common law that states basically, as long as there is a tradition of people traversing that private property to get to the beach, an owner cannot years later set up a fence and deny you right to the beach. That common law was transplanted from England. So you have common laws. You have case laws. Case laws are laws which develop out of the judiciary system, where you could go to the court and you tell the court, I believe my rights were violated in this area. Then the judges will look at the facts of the case and say, okay, this case sets precedence, which means that this particular issues that this plaintiff has brought to the court to be solved has never been addressed before throughout the country. The judge now that's going to rule on that issue, on that civil issue or on that criminal matter issue, who is going to rule for the first time on any issue similar to that issue, that is referred to as case law. So you have common law, which is a natural organic practice about people dispense justice between them. You have case laws, which are laws that develop where that issue has never been addressed by anyone before, so the court now that's addressing this becomes the first one to address it. You have statutory laws, which are laws that are passed by the parliament and the legally constituted body that the people empowers to write new laws. And you have constitutional law, which is the supreme law of the land. So coming down, you have the constitutional law, the statutory law, the case law, and the common law. So when the American Constitution was being written, bear in mind it was written by property owners, by what they call the gentry class. Each and every aspect of the United States Constitution was written, though based upon ideas, was to protect the property class of the United States. So they did not have to sit down and write a 160-page constitution to govern themselves. Let's go to Jamaica now with a constitution of 168 pages roughly. Why did it take so much ink and paper to constitute a constitution for a nation, and was written by, and passed by a people who do not find it necessary to have a constitution for themselves? The Jamaican Constitution was written to protect the interests of the British in Jamaica, and to guarantee that their interests would be protected, they had to sit down and write out each and every article and each and every step, giving the Jamaican future governments no leeway in applying no unintended interpretation to the Constitution. Now we're going to draw certain parallel between the Jamaican Constitution and the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution of the United States were written by the founding fathers of the United States with their interests in mind. The new ruling class within the United States of America. Their constitution were written with their interests in mind. On the other hand, the Jamaican constitution was written not with the interests of the Jamaican people in mind, but with the interests in mind of the British. Now I'm going to give us simple examples to more make it easier for some of us to grasp the difference between these two. When the master of a house is going to leave his children in charge of the house, say I'm going on a vacation for a week or maybe just for the day. If the master's eldest son or the eldest daughter is there, they know basically what has to be done without the parents have to tell them what to do. And the parents will give his or her child the latitude, as long as they use a reasonable amount of discretion, to administer the house and administer the servants without having to give pinpoint detailed direction. When I leave this house, you got to do this, you have 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 to do that. No. He sees his own grown descendants as responsible to make the right decision within that house for the interest of the household. Now let's say he's going to leave the domestic worker in charge of the house now. That domestic worker is not left any latitude of what he or she may do while the master is away. Because it has been inculcated and reminded on a daily basis that the master interest must always be protected by the servant of the house, whether or not it goes against the interest of the servant. So when the Jamaican Constitution was written and the British were about to depart physically from the island, they said, we are going to tell these people what we want them to do. And I want you to keep in mind, for the last 20 years, you have heard this word banter around, responsible government. And any government that governs in the interests of their former master is seen as responsible. And any government that seeks to satisfy the needs of its own people that may go against the interests of their former master are seen as radicals and irresponsible, and therefore branded as being corrupt. And another reason that we're going to develop one day on this term corruption, because a lot of us don't understand what the term corruption means within our political terms. So now let's get into a little more detail in terms of the Jamaican Constitution. Another grave misunderstanding about this constitution was that it came into effect on August 6, 1962, on the date when we allegedly gained our independence. But sad to say, for those who didn't know, the effect of the Jamaican Constitution came in effect gradually, starting from around the 1st or the 2nd of August 1962, and not August 6, 1960. And there was a fundamental reason for that. And this is the reason why. And the Constitution is kind of split into two parts. And the first section of the Constitution deals with giving legitimacy to the laws, rules, regulation, and the position of the then colonial government representative giving them protection right through the time of independence and until 5 years later. Now let me simplify that. You got to remember the Constitution was written by people who were already elected in the colonial government structure. We have to remember that the people who were administering the country prior to the independence were people who were sworn in to protect the interests of the British Empire. So the British government at the time when they started to contemplate independence of Jamaica had to figure out, how do we keep the old colonial structure in place even after August 6, 1962? So what they did was this. After the Constitution, during the writing of the Constitution, they came up with this idea. In order to protect the present colonial administrators and the present colonial system in Jamaica, in order to protect it, so that when the new government, when the new constitution comes into effect, these representatives will not be able to abolish any of the old laws. They gave legitimacy to the colonial structure within the first pages of the new constitution. Now, this is what it means practically. All the judges, administrators, senior police and military officers, all the administrators of agencies, the law which governs them and gave them protection right through the day of independence, those laws began to take effect on the 1st and the 2nd of August 1962. So they gave the old colonial structure legal protection. Not one single individual who was employed by the British colonial authorities prior to August 6, 1962, not one single one could have been removed from office even 5 years after independence. Their positions were guaranteed, their salary was guaranteed, their pension was guaranteed, the agencies could not be changed. Everything became solidified within the new constitution. So here we have a constitution that was written to protect the old legislators that were oppressing the people, to protect the heads of all the oppressive agencies who were oppressing the people, and gave them legal protection up to 5 years after independence. So from August 1st to August 6th, a certain portion of the Jamaican Constitution came into effect that no one in the country knew about except the collaborators that collaborated with the British government to bring us such a dirty piece of rag to govern our lives. And up to this day, they don't spell it out to the people. That's what took place. Now we come up to August 6, 1962. Here is where another trickery took place in the Jamaican Constitution. Though they tried to present it down throughout history, that the election that was held to constitute this country as an independent nation, this question that was put to the people, this is what the first story we were told. Whether we wanted to continue on being a part of the West Indies Federation. You see, up to 1959, the British had clobbered together all its colonial possession within the West Indies as one country. as the West Indies Federation. Yeah, one time we were one country. Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, Grenada, yeah, we were like one federated country. Then a dispute developed between the People's National Party and the Jamaica Labour Party in Jamaica, whether or not they wanted to be a part of this federation. One party said yes, one party said no. So an election was held. Now, this great deception of this election, no one can clearly define today what was the purpose of that election. Was it to dismantle the West Indies Federation, or was it a vote for independence, or was it a vote to accept the constitution that was handed down from England? Which is it? Because there seems to be a conflation of all these three things into why that election vote took place. So some people tell, oh, we voted for a new constitution. Oh, we voted to dismantle the federation. No, no one can tell us what it was. It was like three bullets in one hitting the people at the same time. So you went out and you voted, and you heard that was the end of the West Indies Federation. Then you heard a new constitution came in. Why wasn't there a referendum placed before the people whether or not to accept this constitution? Yet we were gaining independence. Some appointed self-elected elite traveled to Europe, traveled to England, so-called on our behalf, negotiated a constitution that kept the old colonial forces in place. And then on August 6, 1962, you gave me a flag and a song. That is why Jamaica finds itself in the conundrum that it finds itself today. We are a people who are being imposed upon through the forces of collaborators and the colonial masters. That is who governing us. That's where the Jamaican Constitution comes from. That is the reason why that Constitution had to be 168 pages. The British had to lay out, in conjunction with their collaborator, each and every single aspect that governs the life of the Jamaican people. Unlike in the United States, where the founding fathers fought and defeated their former colonial leaders and wrote their own constitution based upon pure ideas of their future intent. And that is the reason why their constitution is 28 pages and ours is 168. They gave themselves the freedom within their own constitution, where they could generate new ideas, implement a new form of government, a new economic system of their own desire. While we in Jamaica was given a constitution, passed in the British Parliament, and each and every aspect of that constitution was nothing but chains and bars that restricts us up to this very day. Now let's look at the concept of the Commonwealth and how the concept of the Commonwealth was written within the Jamaican Constitution. The British people were members of the Commonwealth, as well as citizens of the other Caribbean islands. Do you know that a European from the British domain can come to Jamaica and live here for 3 years and become a prime minister? Did you know that? Yeah. Now, what are the chances you stand and go into England and live there for 3 years and become the Prime Minister of England? What are your chances? Let's say the rules allow for that. What are your chances? Our mind is so colonially possessed that basically anybody can come to Jamaica and get elected to the highest office in this land and govern your life. And your constitution give them that right. Yet we run around proclaiming independence without having any true understanding of what it means to be independent. Now let's look at another aspect of the Jamaican Constitution. It is so detailed and so restricted that the Constitution is written into certain section where if you need to change certain section, it can be done by a majority vote. 51% of the electoral body. Another section of the Constitution is written where in order for you to change it, 60% or maybe up to 2/3 of the elected representative has to vote for that change. And then there's another aspect of the Constitution where a referendum has to be placed in front of the entire voters of the nation before that aspect of the Constitution can be changed. So the Constitution is basically divided into 3 parts. The parts, and we're going to speak in relative terms, the parts that can be easily changed, the parts that can be relatively changed easy, and the parts that's hardest to change because that calls for a national referendum. Now, if you look at these 3 different aspects of the Jamaican Constitution, the parts that easily change or can be easily changed by say 51% of the electoral representative within the parliament, those are the aspects of the Constitution that does not go to the heart of protecting the British interests. Now let me give you an example with that easy part that's easy to change. And I'm just going to create these examples. It's not a tangent because I don't recall exactly what aspect is easily changed. But let's say the Constitution, and it does, spells out how a police commissioner is appointed. Then something simple as appointing a police commissioner. Right? You don't need more than half plus one of the parliament to vote for it. Because that's not a threat to the system. The system does not see you appointing a police commissioner as a direct threat to the fundamental basis of the system that is to govern in the interest of the former colonial master. So they say, alright, we give you a little room there, but you only need half of the parliament members plus one to appoint a police commissioner. That's the first example at the lowest level. Now let's look at where the government may require you to have 2/3 of the elected parliamentarians to change the law about something. Now this may go to, for example, let's say appointing let's say changing the rules that govern a government agency. And like a security agency, that is a little bit fundamental, one of the pillars that uphold the system. So if you want to abolish the Jamaican police force or you want to abolish the military, those are just examples I'm just trying to formulate. The Constitution may say, okay, you need 2/3 of the members of Parliament to vote in favor of abolishing those agencies. The reason why that requires 2/3 is because it is seen where that position may, if it's changed into a radical hand or changed too much radically, it can have the potential effect of having an adverse effect upon the entire system itself. So they require a bit more vote. Now, when you're speaking of something more fundamental to the system, like to elect a government, or to abolish the Governor General's office, or to change the political system from the British form of Westminster governing system to a Republican system, that could be a hell of a threat to the system. So they require a national referendum where the vast majority of the people has to vote for that change. So you see the three different stages that is built into the Jamaican Constitution. That's another way how they lock us in, where we have to function within the favors of the colonial master. They not only lock us in detail-wise, where they spell out each and every detail, so you can never generate any ideas and implement it that may threaten the system. But they also set up a means of how you change the system. That means you cannot bring out any radical change within the system, even if the majority of the nation wants it that way. Now, there's another fundamental aspect to the Constitution and the laws and regulations that govern this country. There are different periods of time that has to be employed even before a bill can be submitted to the Parliament to bring about change. And why does the Constitution requires you, for example, if someone submits a suggestion to change the law, you have to wait like 3 months before you can take a vote. Then when you take a vote, to make another 3 months, then you send it up to the Senate. These are time periods that are instituted in order to give our foreign adversaries and our domestic adversaries times to mobilize whenever they deem it necessary to block certain laws. I'm just trying to show you the different angles in which we are boxed in with this Constitution. So when we speak about changing the Constitution or developing a new Constitution, at the end of the day, the articles of this new Constitution, whether it's an amended form or a newly organic developed form, that Constitution will be written and voted on, and if it's placed in a referendum, the wording of that referendum will be constructed by the present ruling class in order to protect their interests when that referendum is over. So we have to ask, is it necessary for us to still participate in such a system? And I say yes. Yes, it is necessary for us to participate, even though we are boxed in. And the reason why it is necessary for us to participate in any formulation of any new or amended Constitution is because it gives us the power to give or withhold legitimacy to any newly emerging constitutional document in this country. Let's bear one thing in mind. The majority of the people in this country and the majority of the parliamentarians agrees that there is a need for either a newly amended constitution or a brand new constitution. There seems to be some consensus around that idea. But But let's never forget, the purpose to which that constitution shall serve is not of one collective interest. It is going to be the interest of the ruling class versus the true Jamaicans, the oppressed class within this country. But it is you, members of the oppressed, who is endowed with the power and the right to give or to withhold legitimacy to that constitution. And to put it in as simple terms, if we say it no good family. And if we say it good. That's your right that you retain throughout this entire process. Now, we don't want a constitution that does not reflect who we are as a people. No, we don't want it. At the same time, we don't want a constitution that pit one section of the community against the next community. We don't want that either. But that can be easily developed if we do not apply a critical eye to the wording of any newly emerged aspect of this constitution. There must be a critical eye to those who try to implant within our mind that the interest of the ruling class is our interest. For it is not, and it never will be. Let me show you an example of the brethren. The other day I went into a store to purchase an item, a very large item. And this store is owned by people of a different ethnic group. And you could tell they are new immigrants to this country. And the reason why I can say they are new immigrants, because they can still speak the language of their motherland. Most different ethnic groups in Jamaica who are not of the African race, they long ago lost the ability to speak their native tongue. So while purchasing the new item, I asked a member of the proprietor, what's the cost of for this item? And he turns to a member of his race in the store and he started to speak a different language. And they said something back and forth to each other within their language. And I know the language they're speaking. I do not speak the language, but I could identify the language. But I'm not going to identify the language for this purpose, because I'm not really trying to stick anyone out. I'm just trying to relate that story. And when he turned to me, when the individual turned to me and told me the price of the item, I said to him, "Which country are you in?" And he appeared a little bit flabbergasted. He said, "Jamaica." I said, "Okay." So I said, "I'm a Jamaican that comes into the store to purchase an item. And when I ask you the price, you start to speak a foreign language between both of you. And then you told me the price in English." I said, "Never ever again let me come inside this store. And when I pose a question to you, you debate that question in a language beyond my understanding. And then you turn to me and give me that price. Don't be disrespectful like that to me again." I relate that to say to you. And I will point out one more example that's similar to that. You have places in this country that refuse to accept the Jamaican dollar. And they will tell you straight out, if you are not spending the United States, Canada, British denomination kind, you will not come into their stores. That's what Jamaica is, constitutionally. So, you see, brethren and sisters, when we are approaching this constitutional issue, because I already laid out the foundation, why it was written the way it was written, and why it is so hard to change certain aspects while it is easy to change certain aspects. Let us keep and bear in mind that if we are powerless in certain aspects of the Constitution, we are not powerless in certain other ways. You retain the right to the legitimacy or to give or to withhold to that time.